Welcome to the Indeed Evaluation Podcast, where we interview leading experts, practitioners, and policymakers working at the frontiers of evidence-based evaluation in preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization. Indeed podcasts are made possible due to the support of the European Commission and the Indeed Project. You can find out more about the Indeed Project by visiting indeedproject.eu. This is a bit of a special episode. In today's edition, we speak with Deepthy Menon from the Urgent Action Fund for Women's Human Rights, Asia and the Pacific, a feminist rapid response fund that supports human rights defenders, activists, and communities across Asia and the Pacific. There, Deepthy leads the shifting narratives and organisational learning initiatives. Originally trained as a storyteller and as a journalist, and with decades of experience in communications, Deepthy brings a vital voice and vision to how to approach evaluation. In our conversation together, Deepthy delves into the core challenges and opportunities in transforming traditional evaluation methods. She argues that traditional evaluations, often imposed by donors, can feel abusive and judgmental. Instead, she advocates for approaches that support agency, emergent learning, and collective progress, promoting evaluation as a tool for change rather than a mere control mechanism. Deepthy uses her diverse and rich experiences to bring an intersectional analysis to evaluation and how evaluations are done, and advocates for approaches that authentically support and empower ownership by stakeholders and learning as key processes to address critical challenges facing our societies, including violent extremism and radicalization. As a Shift the Power Fellow, she has been working on how to champion measuring what matters. We invite you to learn more about Deepthy Menon and her work reframing perspectives, interrogating accountability, and developing an alternative feminist learning framework that brings together accountability, learning, monitoring, and evaluation. Welcome to the podcast. Hi, and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for this new edition of the Indeed Knowledge Series, where we are joined by Deepthy Menon. Deepthy leads the shifting narratives and organizational learning work at the Urgent Action Fund Asia and the Pacific, which is a rapid response feminist fund that supports the resistance and resilience of women, trans, and non-binary human rights defenders. As a former journalist, Deepthy engaged in the development sector and uses her experience, networks, and skills to support innovative storytelling on feminist learning, movement building, and resourcing. She is an emergent learning enthusiast and is a staunch advocate for shifting unequal power dynamics that exist across international development. And Deepthy, you are currently based in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, as I understand.
That's right. I'm an Indian, but I'm based in Phnom Penh, Cambodia.
Great. Well, it is wonderful to have you with us. Thank you so much. And today we're really going to dive into some of the key topics that you have been bringing forward and innovating in the field, having a conversation that will range across looking at feminist measurement and evaluation, challenges and current approaches to evaluation, narratives and storytelling, and issues of ownership and power when looking at how we make sense of, measure, evaluate, and understand the work that we're doing and how that knowledge is produced, created, and used. Now, Deepthy, we've had a lot of conversations about this in the past, and I'd love to ask you to start us off by diving in with what do you see as some of the current challenges in how we engage with measurement and evaluation today?
Well, Kai, I think the biggest challenge is whose voice is being prioritized and whose stories are being appropriated or misappropriated towards what end. So, if you look at the traditional paradigms, the way monitoring, evaluation, and learning, there is hardly accountability spoken about. We normally talk about it with the acronym MEAL, where there is monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. And accountability and learning is not just towards the donors who are offering money for us to be able to carry forward important work in the development sector, but it's also accountability and learning to the communities that we serve. We are committed to serve. That's the vision that most nonprofits have been set up with. But very often what happens is we uh, we work with the communities and then we extract what we want out of that work. Very often, we do not give back to these communities as to what we are harvesting from them. And I think these are all problematic and symptomatic of the patriarchal ways in which the world and the hierarchies have been set up, where the way the money flows is top down and where the accountability also has to flow bottom up. There is no accountability that is passed on, so it's not a two-way street. And this, I think, is the biggest challenge. And we've been talking about it for decades. It's not like this is something that we are coming up with new. But what we are realizing is we need to find new ways of ensuring that communities can speak up, offer them the agency, offer them a seat at the table so that they can talk about what matters to them. And then we figure out collectively what we measure, how we evaluate the work that is being done within these communities, and how do we then shift the ways these stories are told so that it doesn't make the donors who are offering the money alone look like saviors, but it is about collective accountability and responsibility on how we shift the ways that are not working in this world.
I think you're all too correct when you say that it's something that we've been speaking about for decades. But we are really seeing now, I think, a growing conversation and a growing engagement with this orientation of shifting the power and looking practically at how do we do that and bringing forward innovative and different approaches to measurement, evaluation, accountability, and learning, really engaging with agency and ownership of stakeholders and communities. It's still definitely very much at the margins of a lot of the practice in the field, but there are more and more people that are engaging with it. And this Indeed Knowledge series, as you know, is happening in the context of a European project looking at how we deal with evaluation, learning, and improvement in the preventing and countering violent extremism and de-radicalization fields, but where we're also engaging with experts and colleagues and practitioners from all over the world to have that learning going in all directions so that we can also ourselves in this context here in Europe work to learn from innovations and issues and challenges that are being dealt with by colleagues in other contexts. And these aspects of current approaches, some of the challenges that there are, and also the need to bring forward approaches to evaluation which authentically engage stakeholders, authentically engage communities that are impacted or involved in the work we're doing, is something that we're really focusing on and trying to bring forward in this program. Now, you have spoken in many contexts about feminist approaches to measurement, evaluation, and accountability. What would be the difference? Can you share with us what you mean and understand by feminist approaches, and how does it differ from what you've just described as some of how evaluation is done today and these patriarchal models and approaches of evaluation practice currently?
Well, the first thing that feminist approaches help debunk is the learning in silos. Very often, that is very comfortable. We create templates because that's a way of de-risking investments. And when we have templates and we've set small goalposts, we try and ensure that if those goals are met, then we consider the project a success. Often what happens is the project is actually being run on the peripheries of what has been suggested in the proposal. So very often, most organizations might have two spreadsheets. One is on what they have to report out on, and two is what is actually happening on the ground. And very often, these stories never come out on what's actually happening on the ground. Very often, when you're sourcing data to say a specific narrative or a specific story, you're missing out on the causality. If the program is a success, what actually led to that program being a success? Or for that matter, if there were some things that didn't go right with the program, there's very little information available because you've not asked the groups that you've been working with to collect data or collectively ideate on what went wrong. Feminist approaches instead try and debunk that. It's about coming together. It's about trying to figure out what's working, what's not, by encouraging communities to have the agency to bring their stories out. So it's not that there aren't any templates. Obviously, as a fund ourselves, we do require our grantees to send us some form of report back. But that report back does not necessarily have to come with questions in a certain format. Because we realize that very often, if we ask for a certain format, we receive copy paste versions of what would have been sent in as the proposals. But the moment you start having a dialogue with them, you realize that there is far more nuance to the story than would have come in the email of what the project entailed and how we did the project. So that is one thing. Second thing is understanding and appreciating the agency that the grantees have, giving them the power to tell us as to what they were able to do with the resources that were available to them. And very often we only look at resources in the form of dollars. What is the grant money and what did that grant money help you achieve? And we ask them for the minutiae of how that money was spent and what's the return on investment almost. But there must have been a lot of things that happen on the sidelines with resources that would have been either volunteered, made available as expertise, or of different kinds, which is non-monetary. There is no capturing of that kind of knowledge in most of our traditional log frames. So very often when we are results oriented, we forget that if we tweak processes, there's a lot of change that can be achieved. So there's very little documentation of that. And somehow storytelling is seen as a very feminist approach, but storytelling is not seen as a robust approach when it comes to traditional monitoring and evaluation. Storytelling is almost seen as anecdotal. So you say there's anecdotal evidence available. But if that anecdotal evidence is collected in a manner which has rigor, you're bringing communities together, they're aware of the terms and conditions of why this conversation is happening, what are we building towards, what is the collective goal or the vision that we are trying to achieve at the end of a series of conversations, or say 3 days of convening, then there is rigor in that process. And we want, as a feminist measurement and learning enthusiast, my hope is that one day storytelling is recognized as a robust way of not just collecting data, but analyzing and reflecting on data, and finally emerging with something which is robust in sense making.
Now, a lot of the people that are going to be watching this and also listening to this interview on its podcast format are people working in the evaluation field. And I know that you are passionate about storytelling as a tool and as a practice in evaluation and in helping to foster participation and agency with communities. Can you speak to us a bit more about your experience in working with storytelling and what it brings forward as an approach for enabling learning and reflection in measurement and evaluation processes?
See, very often I think what happens with evaluation is it's dreaded. Most groups dread the idea of an evaluation, not because they have not done the work, but because you don't know what you're being evaluated against. Because very often that's also top down. It's the donor, funding a group of consultants to evaluate what they feel were their goals, and then and these evaluators who are accountable to the donors come to the field and then start looking for proof of concept, proof of success, impact measures. Now these are all things that there definitely is data that groups on the ground must be providing, but at the same time the stories might not fit the templates that evaluators come with. So this is where we always talk about the ability to hold space and make space to hear, which truly reflects the contexts people come from. So evaluators need to understand the context, as well as as well as the way culturally organizations operate on the ground. Very often that becomes a mismatch. I know increasingly there's more thinking around participatory evaluation. There's a lot of thinking around how do we change the norms of evaluation. So I'm really heartened by that. But I still think there's a lot more work that needs to be done, because even now when I talk about, storytelling as a form of evaluating or reviewing work, bringing people together, ensuring it's a safe space, ensuring that we are not just discussing successes, everybody's not coming up with PowerPoints on, how did we succeed, but we are actually going down to communities and measuring what the head, heart, and feet approach, gives. And I don't want to jargonize that. It's about not just thinking with the head, but also understanding where at the heart of communities do they feel that this initiative has been successful or has failed, and what in the community's minds is the way forward. And so when I talk about the head, heart, feet approach, it's used in multiple ways within participatory methodologies. But I would like to propose that every evaluation has head, heart, and feet firmly within it, where the head could be the donor's questions, but the heart and feet are truly with the agency of that is truly with the communities.
I really love that idea, that imagery as well, the head, heart, and feet approach. Head could include not only what donors are looking at, but the analytical components, the trying to dissect and to make sense of it. Heart can really engage us with the purpose, the meaning, the why, and then feet really understanding both the context and the lived experience of it as well. And it gets us in everything you're saying to looking at in some ways, the purpose and the scope of what is it we're doing when we're doing evaluation and looking at accountability. Are we just looking at key performance indicators, numbers? Have certain targets been met? And have we delivered upon what was promised in a project proposal or in an initiative, which is important to understand as well? Or are we also looking at understanding how and why things work and don't work, and those processes, and creating that space? Because we know there is a lot of fear sometimes amongst organizations and practitioners, given current power structures, where if an evaluation comes out and they have experienced difficulties and challenges, those are seen not as an opportunity to learn or something that we can get better from, but that's seen as something which could be seen as negative by donors and threaten sustainability or the future of programs.
Yeah, I mean, the don't work is that fear point, yeah, that if we say that something didn't work, and we are always trying to spin the story to look at the successes, because the successes are where we can show proof of an investment and ensure that there's more investment coming in. But I think there is merit in changing that narrative, where we're talking about what are we learning in the process, rather than talking about what is not working. Perhaps within what is not working lies the solution, which is more innovative. And very often, what happens, and we always miss this, is that between the time that a proposal is, you start writing a proposal, to negotiating the terms of the funding coming in, to the money actually hitting the community or the organization's bank account, there's often a huge time that is spent. And in that time, in the times that we live in, a lot of context has changed. So very often the program that we've asked for money often is not what you would really ideally would have spent money on had you received unrestricted funding. And the stories that come out of when you have received unrestricted funding and feel that the donor trusts your work and that's why they're investing in you is very different from when you're seeking a project based funding and you're receiving project based, indicator based, milestone based funding. And when the proposal and the project is structured that way, how will measurement and evaluation be any different? So we really need to, there's a lot of systemic restructuring that's required. But I think we need to start somewhere. And let's talk about if we can think of innovative ways of measuring and evaluation so that those communities who are actually doing the work are also not burdened by having to do differently and also speak differently.
You spoke now about systemic restructuring, and I know that you've also spoken a lot about unlearning and new ways of thinking and innovation. And one of those new ways of thinking and innovation that I have heard from you and that I know you're engaging very enthusiastically with is the field of emergent learning. And I think that's a term which might be new to many people listening and watching. Can you tell us what is meant by the field of emergent learning, and how does that connect and weave into everything that you're saying?
Well, emergent learning is actually not new, but it's largely been in the global north. So there is a group of practitioners who are emergent learning practitioners. I didn't arrive at it through a course, which is the way many people start practicing emergent learning. We actually started by trying it out as a form of an organizational learning approach for the fund that I work with, Urgent Action Fund Asia and the Pacific. So we started with trying to understand how do we as an organization stay flexible and nimble through the very crisis-ridden context that we work within. And as a rapid response fund, we offer very small amounts of grant money to a large number of people. And usually it's at a time of crisis. So report back is not as easy. So measuring our impact, looking at what stories are we sitting on organizationally, all required an innovative approach. So in the search to see what could be a method that suits us is how we arrived at emergent learning. So it was actually a mix of multiple things. There was Adrienne Maree Brown's emergent strategies. There was 4QP's emergent learning. We had facilitators in our region who didn't understand emergent learning. So they brought in their own ways of thinking. So what we realized is instead of trying to stick to a method, we kind of cobble together, in a modular way, what works for us. So it took us 4 years. We experimented a lot with emergent learning's tools like before action reviews and after action reviews primarily, and started thinking through what is their thinking process, which is about, you experiment all the time. At different points within that experimentation, you reflect. You first plan, obviously. You plan before you experiment. So there is a strict, emphasis laid on planning, which basically means bringing everybody on board to think through what are we trying to do. And once that plan is in place and everybody knows their role within that particular plan is where experimentation starts. And this is not a linear process. This keeps adjusting itself throughout. Reflection and sense making are the key parts where it is largely team driven, where you make space for people who are experts in different areas, but in holding them in equal measure to come in and bring in not just their professional expertise or what they bring to the table within the organization, but also looking at their lived experiences. So when you let people bring in their whole selves to these meetings, you start realizing that the dynamic changes completely. And these are not easy. These are not easy practices. So this is where I often talk about the unlearning required. Because as professionals, we are trained to look a certain way, talk a certain way, and bring certain skill sets into our work. Because we don't bring our full selves into the work that we do. Many of us don't. We often don't correlate our lived experiences with what we are seeing as crises in our professional experiences. But once you bring in all aspects of your personhood into spaces and you feel safe enough to share, the dynamic changes. And this is not theory, this is what we have practiced and seen in our groups. And for funds like ours, which are dealing with polycrisis across different regions, we have always needed something which is flexible and nimble and allows us to actually collectively reflect and collectively take accountability of what happens. And therefore, I think you will see that in the evidence of it in the way we document our stories. We don't just talk about our successes. We talk about the challenges we are sitting on. We are usually sending out calls into our ecosystems to ask for more collaboration and ask for more support in tackling things which we know we cannot do by ourselves. So there is a leaning into vulnerability that's required as well.
And these are really collective, collaborative, participatory, and reflective processes that you're speaking of, where you're bringing everyone in, their whole person, and creating safe spaces and processes to engage, to plan, to think through, to reflect together, right from also that initial development and planning phase of initiatives as well.
Absolutely. I think creating safe spaces and allowing people to express themselves without fear or favor is critical, and it works across multiple contexts, because there is a certain practice behavior that we bring into our professional worlds, and it's very much true about the development sector, where there are multiple challenges to navigate. So there are challenges at the policy level, there are challenges at the execution level, and then there is these multiple hierarchies created by the donor, funder, grantee relationships. So I think once we figure out how to restructure that hierarchy and have honest conversations, the dynamic changes. And we have seen that happening, where donors who've been willing to listen have heard heartening stories exactly the way they want without structuring it, where they haven't imposed the structure, but have received the stories that actually prove, that actually offer them proof of concept of what they have been trying to do with the money that they've invested in work with the communities.
You've mentioned now the importance of really doing this right from the beginning of a project and making the thinking and the concepts explicit. And within the Indeed project, we have had this very significant focus on development of evidence-based evaluation and evidence-based policy and practice, linking that with looking at how do you actually develop and design evidence-based initiatives. And part of the emphasis there is on really building reflective practice and learning into initiative design right from the beginning, and doing what's something still fairly new within the PCVE and de-radicalization field in Europe, which is looking at what are our theories of change? How do we understand what we're trying to do? What are our understandings and perceptions of the context, the issue, the needs we're trying to address, how we see the goals and the impact we're trying to achieve, and how we go about doing that? You used the term siloed earlier, and we see that so often different parts of this work are siloed. Those who develop policies may not be the same as those implementing them. Those designing programs and initiatives aren't necessarily the same as those that will be putting them into practice. And in spaces like these, bringing all of those actors together, both at the development, design, and planning phase, but also throughout, creating that opportunity for collective reflection and learning, but also to bring in the experience and the views of different stakeholders, would really be a significant shift in how a lot of programming and work is done in the field.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you. That immersion into the context and the ability to adapt what our models or templates. I mean, it's not easy to just say that, oh, we will design everything from scratch. It's not possible. It might not be time efficient, nor might it be resources efficient. But that does not mean that you just copy paste templates, copy paste proposal ideas, and then try and implement it across different contexts. So immersion into context is very important. And like you said, having people who normally work in silos, who never get to hear about what their interventions that they've thought out actually have an impact on the ground, getting to hear from those who it impacts directly is significantly thought altering. So when policymakers actually get to hear from people on the ground, and not just practiced testimonies, but raw testimonies where where space has been made, capacities of communities have been built to be able to speak of their stories authentically. Very often, we do have case studies tailor made so that, donors can feel pleased about the investments made. But very often, these are all cherry pick stories. Now, what we are talking about is bringing everybody into spaces, participatory spaces, where communities also have the capacity and agency to speak their own stories, where there is no middlemen playing at, restructuring or rephrasing stories, but in a way that policymakers understand the context and the phrases and the ways that people speak actually. So that's a lot of unlearning that we have to do. A lot of it is done in the name of, oh, we need to be time efficient. People don't have the time. People at the policy level really can't engage with it. But that's also the cause of a lot of ills that we are seeing within the sector.
Could I ask you to share with us, you've spoken about unlearning. I'd like to ask you, having engaged with this work now for some years and experimented and worked with emergent learning, worked with organizational review and collective learning processes, what are some of the learnings that you take from it as a practitioner and as someone who's passionate about working for real impact and change within the field?
See, unlearning again can be a jargon because it's often like, what do you unlearn? If you are once, I mean, in one of the sessions we had, we said learn, unlearn, and relearn. So then the question became, relearning is also a form of learning. So why do we have to stress on that? What we mean by unlearning is there are a lot of practices that we do not agree with, but we go along with because that's how it's been written out. Nobody's gone and checked whether this is still valid in these times. For instance, COVID is the time when all of us moved virtual. And as a result of moving virtual, you are sitting in Europe, I'm sitting in Southeast Asia, we are having a conversation on good practices. We wouldn't have thought of doing this other than meeting at a conference and having these conversations. There are so many new methods of learning from each other that has come about. But till we unlearn that, learning can only happen in conferences through academic journals or documented uh, and what do you say, peer-reviewed stuff, there is no learning. So I think concept level, there's a lot of unlearning. Process level, there is a lot of unlearning. And that unlearning is required so that we can start from a clean slate.
This
There
is
is
something, sorry, please.
no, I was just going to end it by saying that there is a lot of joy in just starting like kids do, where they don't have the grammar, but they're looking at a problem and figuring out what's the easiest way to arrive at the solution, rather than putting in several processes. And if you look at a lot of reviews, evaluation structures we have created, there's a lot we can shear away so that we arrive at the heart of the story much earlier. But nobody's talking to each other. Nobody's trying to see what has worked in different contexts. If there is an easier way of doing things, because there is a certain set style that people are comfortable with. So you don't want to risk comfort. You don't want to sit in discomfort.
This is one of the areas that I'm very passionate and excited about as well. In addition to everything that you've been speaking about so far, we have been having conversations throughout the Indeed project and well beyond with practitioners and with communities all across different contexts in Europe, speaking with communities that are impacted by programs, speaking with local social workers, educators, law enforcement officers, and everyone across the entire spectrum of those that are involved in the field. And the feedback that comes continuously is that current practices and models or approaches to evaluation often simply don't fit with what is needed. And the current approach is that conventional model of contracting or hiring an expert, an external evaluator coming in, usually from a university or a consultancy, sometimes absolutely wonderful people, incredibly experienced, gifted, really good at what they do. Very often people that actually don't have strong backgrounds or experience in evaluation or facilitative evaluation approaches. An approach to evaluation is done, which sometimes people feel is imposed upon them, may use surveys, may use interviews, may use focus groups, qualitative and quantitative approaches, but it's done at or to or on practitioners and communities. And then the final findings are put together in a report, which very often is not even shared with those who took part in the process. It may also be used for academic publications and articles, which can help to get the findings out to those working in the academic sector and to researchers, but don't necessarily formulate what comes out of evaluations in ways that are recognizable to or that can be used in policy and practice. So there's both the process itself, the how the evaluation, the measurement, the learning processes are done, and then also how the results and what comes out of them are actually formatted and used that quite often don't really fit with the needs of the field or what could be goals of facilitating actual and real reflection and learning amongst the actors involved in the field.
Yeah, because most of these, I mean, you've mentioned multiple ways of measurement and evaluation, from surveys to FGDs to key interviews. These are all tick boxes. Then we have followed multiple things. There is multi-stakeholder engagement. These are all jargons we are all comfortable with. We have used rigorous processes. This is how we have aggregated and disaggregated data. So we are looking to hear some comfortable phrases and comfortable terms to support us. But when it comes to facilitated conversations, or when it comes to saying we tried an unconventional way of storytelling, which takes place within communities usually, we brought in a wide array of people from different practices to contribute. Now, what usually happens is we don't all speak the same language. And I don't mean physical language, but also in terms of the jargons that we use within our various professional affiliations and occupations that we have. And because of that, it's more time-taking to build that trust, to be able to share space and to actually speak the truth. And truth is subjective, but at the same time, truth is also powerful. To be able to say, this is why this project succeeded, or this is why the project failed. And, concentrating on the how, as you have said, and not just on, what, is very important. So, because the more you tweak and hone and strengthen the process, the more results that you see, which are unexpected and unanticipated. It's like, once you've strengthened the parts, then the sum of the parts is bigger than the individual parts itself. And I think that's magic, and that's not quantifiable. And because it's not quantifiable, it's uncomfortable for people to sit in, because you don't know what will come at the end of the process. You very often have visualized the end goal, and then you're working backwards, rather than taking people along the process and seeing what comes out of it. So this is where I think there is a discord, and there is a lack of alignment of vision when it comes to how it was thought about, how the execution plan was built, and what happened at the end.
Deepthy, you speak about rigor and flexibility, and how different approaches to evaluation are understood, from narratives and storytelling, and what are seen as credible approaches or what are often met with more skepticism in the field. And you have spoken about and engage a good deal with organizational review And in our conversation before this interview now, you brought up issues of team responsibility and data utilization when engaging in these processes and organizational review. And I'm wondering if you can speak to us about the participatory aspects of this and how in the processes you use, is everyone engaged in these aspects of responsibility and utilization of data and participation in the processes?
So we have arrived at organizational reviews as a way of informing strategy building and strategy planning. So at the fund level, what we usually encourage is for external facilitators and consultants to come and support us in trying to figure out the answers to the curiosities that we have on, say, how have we done over the past 5 years? What have been the areas in which we have been truly able to contribute to a narrative or contribute to change or movement building? And very often, it's not about leaning into their expertise and saying, okay, you do everything and then you figure out the answers and you come back to us. It's about building a participatory process where every part of the organization is involved and each one offers a certain amount of their time and expertise in supporting to frame that overall question. So I think key aspects of organizational review are buy-in at the framing of the question itself that the evaluators will go after. What would be the methodology? What would be the kind of stakeholder engagement that they're building towards it? And also ensuring that each story has multiple perspectives layered on. So no story is spoken in a unidimensional voice, but multiple voices are contributing to enhancing a story, nuancing a story, and making it more robust. So when I speak about rigor and flexibility, the way you mentioned it to me in my head sounded like, are they really, different ends of a pole? They aren't. It is rigor and flexibility can go hand in hand. The process can be rigorous, but the flexibility of whose voice are we allowing to emerge? What are the surprises that are emerging? That's important. And ensuring that just because we have set a process, if the context or the participants change, we will not change anything within the methodology that we set up 3 months ago, but we will lean into but offering and ensuring that we lean into our values and we keep that flexibility at the root of it, so that even if there are changes that happen while a review is in process, we are honestly documenting it and at the same time changing the goalposts that we are going after.
Deepthy, as always, it is so inspiring to speak with you, and you've brought forward so many important areas in how we approach and think about measurement, accountability, evaluation, and learning today. I just want to express my respect, my thanks, my appreciation for all the work that you're doing and for everything you've shared with us today. I hope that this will be an interview which will be heard and seen by many and really help to inspire us to think through critically and to challenge what might be sometimes those accepted practices and things that we do, even when, as you said, we sometimes know that maybe these aren't working or aren't what really fits for what we need, and be open to emergent learning and emergent approaches that can support authentic participation, ownership, and real learning, and going into those questions, not just of what has been done and whether targets have been reached, which are, of course, also important, but really understanding about how and why things work or don't work, and how we can create safe spaces for real learning and reflection to improve what we're doing to actually make a difference in our communities and in people's lives. Deepthy, thank you again so much for joining us. It's truly a pleasure to speak with you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kai. Thank you for the opportunity.